just gonna have to come to terms with the fact that you'll have to live the rest of your life in pain. I stared at the bizarre modern art sculpture behind his desk and then at the Santa Claus-looking man sitting in front of me in a lab coat. A doctor. The best gyno in Los Angeles, according to one of the many plaques on his mosaic wall. My eyes glazed over as he droned on about how living with chronic pain isn't that bad, and convincing me that a lifetime of various painkillers could get me through a day. An expert in his field had just told me that this was my life now. And I thought, if that's the case, I'm out. And at that moment, sitting in that man's office on an overly sunny LA afternoon, I had the first, last, and only suicidal thought I have ever had in my life. I thought about how high the building was and if it was high enough to jump from with a successful fatality, you know? But like, do people even jump off buildings anymore? What if I hit someone upon landing? What if I hit a dog upon landing? I love dogs. I didn't want to kill a dog. Now, I know you're all dying to know if I jumped off that building, but we'll get to that later, so everybody just like seriously calm down, stop asking me. But in all seriousness, it was an incredibly long journey to figure out what was wrong with me, much, much longer than it should have been. For 6 years, I felt like I had the worst UTI of my life. I did not have a UTI. I didn't even have a yeast infection. Now, I never, ever thought that I would want to have a UTI. I mean, what woman in her right mind wants to feel like there are like angry gnomes living in her urethra? You know what I mean? But I wanted one. I wanted one so badly. I wanted a UTI like a kid wants a puppy for Christmas. Because every time my test came back negative, it meant that I still didn't have an answer to what was causing my insane urinary frequency, unbearable pain during sex, and a vagina that felt like somebody had like stuck a hot poker up it, then gotten a phone call from their agent and was like, excuse me, just for a second. But then totally forgot that I was just sitting there with a hot poker up my vag. Anyways, guys, it just hurt. Every test I took came back with a clean bill of health. And I mean, I took every test. Urine, stool, blood, sonograms, x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, you name it, they did it to me. I was a living, breathing science experiment. And once they had exhausted every test known to man, once they had checked every box and still didn't know what was wrong with me, they just stopped caring or giving a shit. And then they told me I was crazy. Hysterical. No exaggeration. Multiple doctors literally said, "You're imagining this." And after enough men in white coats with fancy plaques tell you that you're insane, you start to wonder, am I insane? Because what other options are there? The specialists with degrees must all be wrong, like, isn't a very strong argument. So, after seeing Dr. Number One Gyno in LA, I went to see Dr. Best Urologist on the West Side. He put me on 6 weeks of heavy antibiotics for an STD I didn't have. Antibiotics that he assured me had 0 side effects, but which in reality made me heavily depressed and caused me to gain 15 pounds of water weight. When I asked him if my puffy and depressive side effects were normal, he responded, no. No, the only thing the drugs could do is make you feel listless, out of sorts, exhausted, maybe melancholy. Right, so in other words, the fucking definition of depression, correct? Next, Dr. Best Gyno on the East Side treated me for a vaginal infection he said I might have, like something straight out of the Tower of London How to Torture book. He started an incredibly antiquated treatment that I assume and sincerely hope has been outlawed for years. Okay, everybody just like take a sip of your chamomile tea and stop eating your dessert. I don't want to make you sick. He poured acid into my vagina. Now, listen, it was supposed to, in his opinion, burn away the infected tissue so that healthy tissue could grow back. Guys, listen, we're friends now. I'm not lying to you. Like, this is not a Black Mirror episode. This shit happened to me. The motherfucker poured acid in my vagina. And then, when that didn't work, he said, perhaps the pain is just emotional. And then, of course, there's my favorite. He was older, definitely a grandfather type, and his plaque boasted the best urologist in the nation. Now, I'm pretty sure that you can have one of these plaques made on Etsy, but I told myself his reputation was the best in the fucking nation, so he must be able to fix me, right? His office was dimly lit and full of books, like some sort of fancy library. And when I walked in, he didn't even look up from his seat at his large mahogany desk. Sit down. I did. You're an actress, right? I started to respond, and he cut me off immediately. I know what's wrong with you. Well, holy shit! Hallelujah! Somebody knew how to fix me. This wise old man knew how to stop this crushing pain. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. And then he raised his eyes and he glanced at me through his spectacles and he said, I know your type. You're an uppity actress, and you need to learn to self-soothe, Missy. I was so stunned that I almost couldn't respond. And at that moment, all I could think to say was, do you want to examine me? He nodded no and said, this pain is all in your head. And there it was, yet again. This time from the best in the fucking nation. You're crazy. So, I began to wonder if they were all right. Was I some kind of psycho? Sadist? Was I somehow creating or imagining this pain? Was I crazy? I mean, maybe? I was in such pain. I used to look at people in line at the grocery store and I would imagine their pain-free lives and just want to chuck bottles of kombucha at their heads and then just like do terrible things to them. I went on to see dozens more doctors, specialists, psychiatrists. I even tried hypnosis, all with the same result. You're fine, it's in your head. Until the first thing I noticed was her boots. She was wearing this pair of Balenciaga boots that I had just been coveting for ages, and for some reason, I suddenly felt safe. You know, this woman wore shoes that I understood. I like your shoes, I said, and then I just burst into racking sobs. Tell me what's wrong, she said. And I did. I told her everything. I know exactly what's wrong with you, she said. So I braced myself for the prognosis of mental instability, which I had just come to expect at this point. 9 out of 10 women who come into my office complain of the exact same symptoms, and they all end up having the same thing. She promised to fix me, examined me gently, and never once mentioned acid or insanity. I had spent 6 grueling years in chronic pain, stuffed full of mind, body, and sanity-crushing medication. But on that day, Dr. Balenciaga Boots looked me right in the eyes, and she said, "My dear, what you have is shockingly common. It's called pelvic floor dysfunction. 1 in 3 women have it, and you can stop eating addicting pain pills like they're Tic Tacs, because we can fix you with simple physical therapy." I'm sorry, did you say physical therapy? Physical fucking therapy? I had my sex life, my work, and my sanity compromised, taken more psychotropic drugs than an 80s child star, been insulted, demeaned, and reduced to a depressive shell of a human, and my answer was in Pilates? I mean, great, but also like, seriously? As my vagina got better, I began to reflect. Before I met Dr. B. Boots, I was so at my wit's end that I had truly started to believe that all those dicks with plaques were right. That maybe I was crazy. Hysterical? Was I? No, I had allowed myself to be convinced that I was hysterical. Female hysteria. Yep. Female hysteria is still a very, very real medical diagnosis. It's 2017. Female hysteria? Seriously? Are we still sending women to the woods to bleed during the full moon? Now, in retrospect, I wouldn't trade in my pain, because my pain taught me everything. I learned the hard way that it is essential that we as women know our bodies and that we trust them and that we don't ever let someone tell us that what we are feeling isn't real, because it is. Just the fact that you are feeling it makes it real. Hysterical is a way to demean, to dismiss. In one word, to strip you of any sense of self or power, to make you small and put you in your place. Hysterical woman is sister oppressor to nasty woman. It reduces you to a weak and unintelligent nothing. So what's the moral of this fable, you ask? Let me tell you a little story to drive my point home. I shot a movie a few years ago with a male co-star who was going through a nasty divorce and very angry at women. I was playing a sex worker and he my abusive pimp boyfriend. And one night we were shooting a pretty violent sex scene where he's supposed to fuck me at gunpoint. Anyways, he says, "Oh man, wouldn't it be so great? Like, wouldn't it be really moving if I fucked you with the gun? Wouldn't that just like really up the stakes?" So, standing in front of the entire crew, the director and producers, I said, "Yeah." And I told myself at the time that it was, for the sake of the movie, but in truth, I just didn't want to seem difficult. Because difficult for an actress, or really for any woman, is an incurable leprosy that haunts you to the grave. But I am here today to tell all of you and myself, never again. Never again to a doctor pouring acid inside of me or telling me I'm crazy or over-medicating me just to get that anxious actress out of his office, or a co-star sticking a firearm up my vagina because they hate their wife. It's 2017 and a bobblehead might be our president, but that does not mean that we have to give anyone else power over our bodies. We are currently in very real danger of losing that power, or rather having it stolen from us. The power to choose when we want a family, if we want a family, the freedom to care for our bodies as we see fit. So to every woman out there, I say hold on. Hold on for dear life to that power, because it's your birthright. And to every man out there who ever tried to strip me of my power by telling me I was hysterical or imagining things or just too anxious, who essentially tried to lock me away in a room with yellow wallpaper, I say, kindly, fuck off.